Hello. There's one person who's waiting, which is delightful. I just posted this yesterday. Last week, I missed a live session because I got the time wrong, and it motivated me. I'm now going to do these every week, as long as there's some interest. In the meantime, oh, and there's two people apparently on. Hello. I'm actually I'm actually pretty good at talking to myself. I do it all day. I'm kind of like my own Walkman. But but I'm really glad to have you here. Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. RM Zux. Uh Feel free to remind me your name if you're willing. Totally fine if you're not. Anyway, I'm glad to be here, and I can talk to myself. I do a lot of that, but I also would love to. Robert from Cleveland, from the last Saturday, Sunday chat. Great to see you, man. Um, is your last name Zuck? Zuck? Um, no, wait, that's too many. Oh, yeah, Se. Anyway, uh, this has been a good, productive week for me. I like it when there's a little audience. I don't get the kind of audience that some people do. Um, uh, Thousands and thousands of views, but there's been a lot of views lately on this video, in particular, this one that I put out a couple days ago about the incredible uh, wokeness of the Trump movement. And I'm writing one today that will be on a broader version of that. My question about how to exercise and manage our platonic appetites. They're there from the origins of writing. You hear it in the religious version, but also in the philosophical. Um, yes, I can see how that would be that would be a rough last name to grow up with, especially during an era when everybody says the word sucks. Um, but it's great, yes, and we weren't. Our ancestors weren't that far apart. My folks were the typical Jews that came from the Ukraine. All my grandparents came from that area. Um, uh, anyway, yeah. So it's great to have you here, and feel free to run anything by me. Just think, this is almost a one-on-one, at least so far, with Robert. I see that 7 people have joined. Thank you for joining. It's nice to have you here. Anybody, throw anything at me. In the meantime, I'll ramble for a second about what I'm playing with today. This is all serious play for me. I mean, I've got rigorous standards within which I bounce around in all sorts of directions. I just got back from a hour-and-a-half walk. I do this maybe 5 or 6 times a week with Terrence Deacon, the Harvard turned Berkeley neuroscience professor who I've been jamming with for 30 years. And he's a very rigorous thinker. I brought him an idea this morning. We worked it around. Um, I just love having those conversations. I feel incredibly lucky to be able to just come up with a question and run it by this guy who's way more encyclopedic than I am. His background is deep. So we were into subatomic analysis. We were working all the way out to politics. He's got the same range as me, but his focus has been on explaining from the ground up, with no skip steps, no unexplained explanations, the origins of life, the origins of hierarchy, the origins of language in humans. That's where his neuroscience work started out. Anyway, even in the sciences, we're up against a lot of this Platonism. So what do I mean by Platonism? So Plato's philosophy is called idealism, and it's grounded in an idea that he cribbed from Pythagoras. Pythagoras looks at a bunch of human man-made triangles and comes to this conclusion. And actually, Pythagoras is cribbing it from the Egyptians, but he comes up with this vision, this mind's eye vision of the ideal triangle, and then comes up with some regularities about triangles, trigonometry. Okay, and Plato It's very ambiguous who we're listening to when we're listening to Plato, because we have nothing written by Socrates. There's only one other mention of him in a play, but and as a guy who's in the clouds, um, but Plato is quoting Socrates. Plato doesn't ever say anything that isn't from Socrates' mouth or from some detractor from Socrates. This is kind of the birth of philosophy. And it starts with idealism. This idea that Plato, Plato lifts from Pythagoras. Pythagoras is talking about the ideal triangle, and Plato wants to apply the same thing to things like friendship or love, justice, all of that. He wants to find the ideal for those. And so Neoplatonism, by that time, what it becomes is that there's um, a absolute truth out there in some supernatural realm that emanates and gets distorted in the process, to where what we do here on Earth is a rough um, a rough rendition of the ideal. And in the meantime, you've got the same thing going on in religion, but it's almost the same. So while we associate Plato with critical thinking, it's all critical thinking to figure out what the ideal is. The familiar example is Platonic love. This comes from a session, what they used to call a symposium, which is bunch of guys sitting around drinking wine and talking about the nature of love, the true nature of ideal love. And out of it, we get this idea that ideal love would be Platonic. It would be asexual. So I see this as a representation of what any organism would want, but could only be conceptualized in language. So these are the first people writing things down. And not only that, they're starting with a great thing that's very similar to YouTube Live in that it's supposed to be a dialogue. Dialogues are so much fun to write. I've got a book sitting in my drawer that I wrote. I knocked it off in like 6 months. Someday I'll probably put it out there. It's the entire thing's a dialogue, because with dialogue you get to be able to do all of the yes buts that you'd want to do. You're kicking the tires on some idea, and that's all Plato's doing. But he's doing it. The critical thinking is towards the ideal. He wants to figure out once and for all the right way to live, the absolute truth. And you also hear this in, you could say, the most dangerous part of Plato, which is, at least in how it's interpreted, which is the story of Plato's cave. So just think of how MAGA this is. You got a bunch of people who are oppressed and chained. It's basically the Matrix story. You got a bunch of people who are oppressed and gaslighted in chains, and one hero breaks free, leaves the cave where they're chained up, and deluded, and sees the light. And what an ecstatic vision that is for humans. Just think how many manifestations of that we've got going on everywhere in the world. For example, that there are 45,000 different sects of Christianity. So everybody's seeing the light. Everybody wants to claim they've seen the light, like MAGA does. But basically woke. This is what all I'm talking about here is woke to the ideal. So he leaves a cave. He's heroic for doing so. He's brave and daring. I mean, this is like almost the story of most movies in its own way. And then sees the light, and then that makes the deluders villains, very MAGA, and makes the hero heroic for going in and rescuing everybody from their delusion now that he's seen the light. So as I mentioned in that last video, I'm all for waking up, but mostly to the fact that they're going to nod off again. And also, for me, the right way to leave Plato's cave is to come to the realization that you are deludable, and that there's no reason to assume that because you've seen this light, it's the last light you'll ever need to see. And yet that's the human appetite. And so I think about this in my pragmatic life. Whenever I hear someone self-idealizing through self-flattering self-reporting, they're trying to reassure me that I can trust them. has exactly the opposite effect on me. When someone says I've got integrity, I know they have not thought about what integrity means, um, what a challenge it is to try to maintain even some integrity for all of us. This is true of all of us, not just them. Um, they have no idea what it is. They just think it sounds hella cool. It's what the cool kids are wearing, and so they're going to claim that they have it, that they've seen that light, because integrity sounds good. They're going to claim it for themselves. So, in general, I'm working towards some understanding of some suggestion that whenever you hear someone proclaiming the truth, it says way more about their appetites than whatever truth they're claiming. That is, it's not just their appetites, it's my appetites, it's everyone's. You notice that the anxious don't dream of being okay. They dream of being enlightened. When I look at Buddhism, which I dabbled in for a while, and at one point thought I might ought to join a ashram or something like that, a Zen center, um, I was at my most anxious. And I wanted to get the hell out of there. I wanted to get to a place, a plateau above it all, where I had found the truth and was basically robotic, living in the light of that truth. And no, I don't trust it in me. I don't trust it in anyone. And the question is, so I don't trust it, but I also don't trust that a human could ever stop being that way. It's just built right into our natures. And before language, that is, all of the traits that God supposedly has. And you know, I'm an atheist. I don't believe that. But I do believe the appetite is really strong in us. Um, I mean, I totally understand. I I I vibe what it would be like to want a God. But when you think about what a God has, it is the idealization of the four traits that any organism would wish for if they had the conceptual competence, the symbolic competence, the competence with language. That is, if they could put words to it, they'd want they'd want the power to get what they want. They'd want complete understanding, so they'd be ideally omnipotent. They'd be omniscient. They'd know everything they need to know. Nothing left to learn. Very MAGA. Um, and so they'd have absolute powers of interpretation, always knowing what's right, always doing what's good, and always with perfect integrity. That because what is integrity really? It's checks and balances that sustain a fragile system. All organisms are they're not objects. They're checks and balances. And the same would be true for governments, that all governments are systems of checks and balances that maintain fragile systems. That's my biggest concern about MAGA, and not the movement, but what it's unleashed on the world is this capacity for unchecked power simply by unearned authority. That is, no matter the consequences of your actions, you are always right, righteous, mighty, and have perfect integrity. And that's what I see in the Trumpists. The Trump trolls have been uh, they've been having a field day with with this video I just put out, and so I'm just listening to them, and they have all fallen for that. And I'm as concerned about counter cults as I am about cults. I'm not interested in a lifestyle brand or whatever truth they claim to have, whether it be Buddhist or MAGA. It's all the same to me. Um, and uh, and not admitting to the clusterfuck of iffy guesswork that life really is, not wanting to admit to that, not wanting to have to deal with that, and so so that's a theme I'm playing with these days, and I would love to have any questions or challenges or critique, because you are my checks and balances, darlings. Um, uh, any critique of what I've suggested. Here comes something. I follow the place, but Trump seems to just tell people what they want to hear in the moment. Uh, Great point. Yeah, I'm with you there. So notice that. Let's take that last one. God is one. There's not a name for this, but it's basically the claim that he's got perfect integrity. that he so the way this shows up in theology is could God build a mountain so big he can't move it? The answer from theology is he wouldn't. He's avoiding any kind of contradictions. And um, the only thing that a MAGA person has to have integrity, has to be consistent about, is their claim of consistency. So because consistency is a good thing, it's a moral thing, you claim it as something you have. You have oneness. You never contradict yourself. And then you are free to contradict yourself across the spectrum. So look at Jesus and how he is a contradiction. He is the oppressed, suffering minority. He is also the King of Kings. So he wins both ways. Even when he loses, he wins. So to me, that becomes the freedom. That's the ultimate ideal pandering, is that he tells them what they want to hear in the moment, and they never have to look at it. I mean, the number of Trump trolls who announce at the beginning of our conversation that they have critical thinking skills because Trump told them that he does. Uh, it's just phenomenal. These guys are just collecting all the merit badges and deflecting all the demerit badges, and that's a problem that extends beyond MAGA. It's why I'm interested in this fundamental question, lifestyle irrelevant. That is, I'm not interested in the lifestyles. I'm interested in this human appetite and how it keeps on playing out and fucking things up. We all look at the MAGA movement, those of us who aren't in it, and say, this ain't going to end well. And if there's any lesson from history, it's that this kind of stuff doesn't end well. So if we ever get a chance at restoring the kind of democracy we were hanging on to by a skin tag before Trump came along, I'd want to know how to deal with this Platonic urge in us. And it's interesting that we call it idealism. In philosophy, we call it idealism, the idea that there's a perfect triangle out there in some other realm. Um, uh, uh, Andrew just raised the question: how do we counter the facade of integrity? Great question. I want to get right to it. But first, I just want to point out this dovetailing between the common sense meaning of ideal and the philosophical sense. So the philosophical sense of idealism includes the triangles that Pythagoras came up with. Nothing about morality. It's just that there's an ideal triangle somehow out in the universe or outside the universe, and that we are imperfect manifestations of it. And then when you tie that in with the common sense meaning of idealism, which is basically the figment of ultimate satisfaction, that you could get the whole package, let's say through revelation, the truth revealed to you, you've seen the light. That's the challenge. And to Andrew's point, to Andrew's question, this is where I live these days. So we have a study group. There's 100 people signed up for this, and I invite you to join it. We meet every other Sunday morning at present. We're looking at the possibility of moving it to a different time, or at least I am. I want to make it convenient for people. People all over the country come together to deal with Andrew's question. How do you counter this facade of integrity? We don't know yet. But we admit we don't know, rather than what a lot of anti-Trumpists are doing, which is just doubling down on their counter-idealism, or at least on the techniques that worked in the last war. I mean, you could say that Harris's campaign was a replay of what worked for Obama. So that's usually not a good idea. And it really isn't now, because the Trumpists, or the people who claim the facade of integrity, they have antibodies to all that stuff we've done in the past. They've solved it. But the question we're dealing with is, how do you humbly humble someone who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? So we're dealing with that question, and we're dealing with it by experimentation. One of the main reasons I put out my videos is so that I can have more and more encounters with Trumpists, because I'm trying out different things. So here's an example of something I've been trying out. A Trump troll writes to me and says, why would anybody support the Democrats, the party of pedophiles? And with this guy, I'm trying out a gentle approach, because I got to humbly humble them. No matter how I do it, I don't get to grandstand my idealism against theirs. I don't want to do that. It's boring and it's ineffective. It's not working. And I happen by nature to have a wide range. My repertoire is actually fairly, I'm just centering myself here, is fairly wide. I can be a real gentleman. It's not my nature, but I'm pretty good at it. I can be very kind, gent. I can also be incredibly feisty and vicious. So the one thing I'm trying out with an example with this guy who's a pedophile says that, thank you for writing. You and I are about on the same page about pedophilia. We both disapprove of it. You've got a bit of a challenge these days because a bunch of people think that Trump was the pedophile, what with his Jeffrey Epstein engagements and all of that. What would you say to them to show that you're not just paying attention to whatever pedophilia serves some other goal? How do you prove to them that you are a person of integrity? That's one approach. Over at the other end of the spectrum, I have tried plenty of things that are harsher. But the thing is, I'm trying. That is, and I'm a musician on the side. And so I go home and I woodshed and I practice and I try things out. And then when I gig, I want to be an adept improviser. I play jazz. So that means that I have to gain a kind of fluency to be able to read the room, read the fellow musicians, or read the trolls. And it's really hard. So, for example, there are people who I mistake for absolutists. That is, they'll say anything to pretend they're always right. Basically an asshole from my perspective. People who use confirmation bias as a solution to all of their problems. So I got to read on a dime, based on very little data, whether the person is coming at me like a troll or coming at me with real questions. And I make mistakes. It's kind of built into it. I make mistakes in opposite directions. One direction is I assume that someone's a troll, and actually they've got some curiosity. Because really, what we're talking about is people who have shed all curiosity, usually on a topic. Trump has shed it on all things 24/7, but most people are hobbyists, and I'm for their hobbyism. I've got my places where I get to pretend that I'm a superhero. I think we all do. Even those people, you could say, even especially those people who say, no, I never would do that. That's beneath me. Egotism is beneath me. I think we all have that appetite. These guys are just exercising it in the wrong place. So another approach that I've tried is to say, dude, I feel you. I get it. I've been where you are. So this is what I call inverse projection. I say, I know what it's like to be so anxious that I crave the ideal, claim to have found it, and pretend that I'm on the path to it and therefore that I can lord it over everyone else. I understand your zeal. I've been a zealot too. I could tell you stories about my facade of integrity. But my problem with how you're doing it, this is way too long for them to read. I'm trying to figure out how to say it really short when I'm actually delivering it. But here I'm unpacking it. My problem is that they're doing it in the public square about government infrastructure. You probably, if you've heard me before, you've heard me say self-love is important. This facade of integrity is important, but get a room. and don't let it go to your head, and don't circle jerk in the public square to uh, government as your vanity project. That's my only issue with them. I'm not really even focused on the policy. I think their policies are disastrous. I have a master's in public policy. I do policy analysis. That is not what's going on with them. It's this thing about telling people what they want to hear in the moment. That's all. It's doing that in the public square that is going to turn out badly. It always does, because why does it always turn out badly? Because it's unchecked power. And the only things that survive, including a living being, are things that only fragile things that survive. So there are things that survive or exist by durability, but any fragile system like me or a government is checks in balance with each other. So these are forces that imbalance the checks in ways that are very hard to restore. So, this last week has just been a terror. I've been skimming the news. I tend to skim hate mail and disappointing news. That's one of the ways in which uh, I don't pour over. This is why I need to say it short to Trump trolls. They are not going to sit around for long. They're not going to listen. They're especially not them. They have an alternative in the pandering they get from Trump and their fellow trolls, the Goon Squad. But also these are nervous ninnies, which is another big part of what I do attack them on. So this is another experiment that, or you say a theme in my experimenting. It's inspired by Karl Rove, the Republican who got W. Bush elected, who said you don't attack their strengths, you don't attack their weaknesses, you attack their strengths. So their strength is that they're macho and tough, and I think they are pussies. They are wimps of the highest order. And so over on this end of the spectrum, when I'm getting aggressive, I point that out. What a wuss you are. That you want to you somehow think that because you could point out the inconsistencies in fellow humans, that proves you don't have any inconsistencies. That you could point out someone else's biases proves that you don't have any bias. You are such a little panty in the twist chicken little. So I'm trying all of these different ways to counter. Hello, Snowy Isle. Nice to see you. And I think you may have been one of the ones who showed up last week. My apologies. I screwed up last week. I somehow remembered it at 2:00 and even checked beforehand. But somehow missed that data and ended up not showing up. Anyway, this is what I'm inviting people to do in the trauma of the moment, uh, is to get less dramatic, melodramatic, to not copy them in their self-idealism. They are hyper romantic in the broad sense of the term romance, which is this sense that there are heroes struggling against everything, destined for glory and happily ever after. So I wouldn't want to counter that with ours. I'm trying to figure out better ways to more efficiently get them off their fucking high horse. How to do that remains a challenge. I consider that question that I pose. How do you humbly humble humans who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? I consider that the $8 billion person question. That is, I don't think civilization will survive unless we get more efficient ways to answer Andrew's question. I'm looking for them. There's a kind of optimism in looking because I don't think people have spent nearly enough time on this question. It's kind of like the optimism I have to counter a little bit the pessimism about climate crisis, which is we have not yet begun to fight. That is, we've only recently started to work on the technologies that could save us from total climate collapse. I feel the same way about this question. I think if we don't get better answers to Andrea's question, we are doomed. Civilization is doomed. Humanity might not be doomed. I was talking to Terry, he was a biological anthropologist, and he was saying, look back over history and you'll find that there are these times when humans have been down to tiny populations. He sent me a graph about it. It's on my I posted on Facebook. I posted here if I don't want to get too distracted by it, and I don't even see where I'd post it. But anyway, 150,000 years ago, the human population in the world was down to 600 fertile individuals. 600. So it's not the end of the world till the end of the world, but it's the end of civilization if we don't solve this question better than we've been solving it. And it's the same old question over and over. What are you going to do with people's idealistic urges? The ways in which we are fundamentally anxious beings. Humans are uncommonly anxious the way compared to other organisms because of language. We can imagine all of these terrifying things, all these missed opportunities and threats that no other creature can imagine. And not only that, we're bouncing around in a world full of other people who are imagining their threats. They're different from ours. We're all trying to prioritize the threats, but we're doing it as anxious ninnies because that's what a human would be. And we're all claiming last words like God or what Platonism is basically what it comes down. Right, poltergeist. I want to come back to the first thing you said, but but being a slow reader, I'll come to the second thing. They wouldn't understand even if they were listening. I get it. Easily 30% of the comments I get from people are comments on my videos are like that. They're saying you're talking to a brick wall. They'll never listen to what you're saying. I get it. I agree. And yet I'm still arguing that question, okay, and I'm now seeing the beginning of what you wrote. Yeah, thank you for your awe at experimenting. It's not a heroic thing. It's just what a human should be doing at this point. But boy, do I invite you to join us because we got to figure this out, and it's going to take all sorts of people. But statistically, half the trolls have lower than average intelligence, I fear. No, I totally agree with that. And yet I don't want the heroism that comes from the nihilistic approach. And I'm not suggesting that you have this going on, brother bingo or sister bingo, but I get it a lot from commenters. There's a kind of I'm above it all. I'm above the fray. Um, I look down and see that this is hopeless, and I'm proud of my ability, my wise ability to know to give up. I get the impulse. I get every human impulse because in case you haven't noticed, I'm a human. And so I totally know that. It's one of the reasons why I did 6 videos on the origins of life research that I'm part of, because right after Trump won, because I had to wait for the dust settle and my mojo to return. Um, so let's see. Okay, so you are identifying the challenge that I am experimenting with because though I know that it's likely hopeless, I'm not fueled by hope. That's not. I'm fueled by curiosity. It's fun. For me, it's a luxury for it to be fun. It started out humiliating to be curious because I had to hang out with people who knew more than me. It was quite the punking. But somehow, in my case, the curiosity, and a lot of this is just the dumb luck luxury of my life. I don't have to earn a living. I mean, I do not expect most people have time for the kind of shit I'm into. Um, and you could say that the Trumpists are way over on the other end of the spectrum through a combination of austerity or poverty and education deprivation and indulgence. This has come up in that research group. We had an interesting little tiff between 2 women named Linda at the last meeting. I found it fascinating. Um, a lot of Trumpists are what I'd call innocent evil. And the question becomes sympathy for the devil. These guys are doing awful things. But if I were them, I'd do them too. If I had their situation, I'd do them too. Um, Yes, as long as it doesn't drive me mad. Here's why it doesn't drive me mad. Is because I'm curious about this stuff. That's what drives me. I don't go up and down much in my mojo based on how many views I get or how at a larger scale um uh, uh whether we're going to hell in a handbasket. I'm actually just using my life, including my incredible and unjustified quantity of discretionary time to deal with an interesting question, to deal with interesting, you could say, macro questions. There was a time when I did more charitable work one on one, but I haven't done that in a long time. I tend to, by my nature, be drawn to these bigger questions, and and not just because of the luxury of a big question being one where you can get incredibly abstract, um, but because I'm interested in a rigorous approach to this. I'm just trying to take rigorous notes um, as fast as I can before my brain uh, farts in senility. That's really all that's left. So it doesn't drive me mad because I'm curious about these questions, and because I'm safe enough or comfortable enough that I can afford to think about them. I mean, it does drive me crazy how many rich people go the other direction, which is they stop. Curiosity is gone for them. I've worked for some once successful bosses, and I've seen the way the Platonism plays out in them. That is, that they had a success, whatever part of it is their skill or their dumb luck, and they act like they have seen the light, and they are now the authority on everything. Not all of them are like that. My big mentors tend to be the successes who weren't like that, who who countered the authority they had earned with curiosity. They're rare, and yet I lucked into some. This guy, the Harvard Berkeley senior professor, I've never met a more curious guy. He could be resting on his laurels. Most people as successful as he was do, because that's the comfort zone that a human would want. Noam Chomsky is my example of this. This guy has very little curiosity. I'm not talking about in his political views, which I mostly resonate with, but in linguistics, the guy decided that he was a god, and which is kind of the irony of Chomsky for me, is that and it's a typical irony. He in politics, he's against the closed-minded of the MAGA people. In practice, in linguistics, he is as closed-minded as they get. Anybody who disagrees with him is just plain wrong. Um, so you've got these kind of, you could say that some of them maintain performative curiosity, but most of them aren't really curious anymore because they've already had success. They're like my boss is like that. And I should say, I had it out with a boss recently, a part-time boss, my editor at Psychology Today. Um, uh, she wins all arguments about what goes into Psychology Today. She has that authority. I grant that. That's not an issue at all. I mean, when she says no to this, it's no to that. But there is this tendency I've seen in other people as well to talk like you have solved reality and that you're tutoring everybody else on solved reality. And to me, they could be right or wrong about reality. That is, they're not just my boss in what I get to blog, but they could be right. But I don't take it as more than an opinion, a guess. And in general, when someone talks to me like they've solved reality, it's a red flag. It makes me more skeptical, not less skeptical. So in my practical everyday life, when someone does self-flattering self-reporting to reassure me that I can trust them. I mean, the way I would unpack the phrase trust me is I know you don't trust me, but trust me, you can trust me. Um, uh, it's just a red flag. It has the opposite effect. And I encourage you to think about that and to try to spot it in your everyday life, including in yourself. because all of this is including yourself. It's a different kind of Me Too movement. Me too. I'm human. Nothing human is foreign to me. But check for where that shows up. It's a shorthand that we use a lot. For example, a Trump troll who said to me, well, if there's one thing I know, it's how to spot bullshit. Which is just like, yeah, okay, I understand the urge to say that. And I mean, I can imagine me saying that. Uh, I don't, though. I, 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 I don't think I do. I'm trying not to. You know, if I say I don't do that, I'm also self-reporting. So this goes layers and layers deep. Um, you know, all I can say is it's a red flag in others, and my assumption is the golden rule is not a rule. It's at best, it's whatever you do unto others, you is fair game for them to do back onto you. That's as close as I get to making sense of the golden rule. Otherwise, it's a golden paradox. That is, as if everybody compromised to accommodate everybody, no one would have to compromise. It's kind of the paradox that we call the golden rule. But anyway, the, yeah, just watch for that move. It's incredible how popular that one is. And it happens indirectly in most memes. When you read a meme that comes to some pat philosophical wisdomy conclusion, it is someone bragging. That's what I'm paying attention to. It's it's usually a half truth, preening like it's the whole truth. I think that's almost invariably the case. That is, there are checks and balances in our moral edicts. You should be judgmental is judgmental. Do not be negative is negative. Commit yourself to flexibility is a commitment and a flexibility. Be intolerant of intolerance. So many people recognize that last one. Something like Karl Popper came up with. He's a guy, philosophy of science guy. They see, you know, the integrity paradox. I'm saying you look across the moral spectrum, you'll see that they're all there. They're all dilemmas. The moral imperatives are actually uh, um, they're actually paradoxes, and that we're all trying to figure out where to be in any particular situation with respect to, for example, what should you tolerate, what should you not tolerate, when should you be negative, when should you not be negative. Um, and some people simply claim that they are never negative. Uh, what they mean by it, it gives them complete MAGA-like license, because at that point they can simply say, I wasn't being negative when they're negative, because everybody gets negative. That is, we all hate certain things. We all dislike certain things. So they somehow have a way of ignoring that, or saying, no, that wasn't me being negative. It's something else. Nothing stunts our growth, our moral growth, as bad as these one-sided, half the stories, you know, the claim that you should always be positive or something like that. No one does it. No one should do it. Um, it's basically an expression of this human appetite, this craving for last words that further words always make impossible. Religion and alternate reality for delusional people. Yes, Chris, I'm with you there, and I'm also extending it beyond religion. Religion is kind of the ideal way to do it. When you think about it, you're creating this distance uh, to your highest authority while claiming the ultimate intimacy with them. You've got this name droppable, imaginable friend in the sky um, that is on your side and loves you. Um, so yes, good. Just to pick up on what Tom says. Yeah, I find enlightenment is a perfectly fine goal as long as you know it is absolutely, uh, um, yeah, it is absolutely unachievable. It's a ridiculous figment. So when you say sail it as a path takes time, I'm not with you there. I think that that's exactly the Platonic thing that I'm trying to avoid. That is, actually selling it is not, doesn't, it, try this out. Trump is selling a version of enlightenment. It's not your version, and your version is good and his is bad, but he would say the same about yours. He would say yours is bad and his is good. But he's selling this figment of ultimate satisfaction. And to say it's not a destination also becomes an interesting kind of cutting yourself slack. So when you think about Christian forgiveness, or the whole idea that we are born sinners, think of the slack that cuts Christians. And we see it all the time. We see it in the MAGA movement, is they cut themselves slack all the time. They're all about forgiveness, but only for them. So, and I want to argue that Trump's enlightenment, which I know is different from yours, and yours is different from some other Buddhists or spiritualists or whatever. That is, everybody's got their version of the figment of ultimate satisfaction. But I'm suggesting that he managed to pull that off. He sold that in no time. And why? Because it's not about the content. It's not about the fucking lifestyle brand. It's about this reassurance that you're on the path. It's very much like the concept of purgatory. Purgatory is a waiting room. You're destined for heaven, but you've got to pay your dues first. And with purgatory, you get ultimate, infinite time, and then you get the whole Protestant thing where he sold indulgences, which shorten the amount of time that you spend in purgatory. But you're going to get there, and I'm saying no, you're not going to get there. This is human life; it's different. So. And one of the things I'm trying to point out here is whether you are religious or spiritual, or even philosophical, you have this challenge you're going to deal with, which is the human anxiety and the compensatory self-love that is going to idealize a state, whether you call it enlightenment or not. It is generally, so this is an important non-distinction for me between spirituality and religion. Whether your higher power has a beard or not, that is a beard or not, is irrelevant. If your higher power has a goal, wants things, then you are still playing the same game. That is, you're trying to align with some ideal that you've imagined, and you're claiming some credit for being on the path. That is, you're in purgatory. I'm not perfect yet, but I'm trying, and I know what perfection is. One way or another, you're in that game. And so this is, my campaign is basically to get people to exercise that safely and by managing it. I need that feeling. I watch tons of TV. That's mostly where I get it. I also jerk off. That is, I'm one way or another, I am indulging that appetite I have for the ideal. And I'm trying to do it safely. Just don't do it in the public square about things we all depend upon. Okay, so let's see. I'm catching up here a little bit with some stuff here. Let's see. They worship an entity. Yeah, they do, Chris. And yet, let me make sure I'm following the thread here. Yeah, I want to argue in response to your point. I don't think in terms of delusional people. I think in terms of people having a delusional appetite. You, Chris, me, Jeremy, we have a delusional appetite. I got to do something with it. I can't just pretend that other people have delusions because I have different ones. I can't do that. That's not safe for the world. I have to admit to my delusions, and I have to manage them, which includes exercising them. I do not believe I can pinch them off. I don't believe I could lobotomize that shit out of me. It's in me. It's a human thing. And so that's where I'm playing. And it's totally fine with me, Chris, if you play someplace else. But the thing I'm advocating is to stop talking about delusional people and try to get to this thing that's in all of us. This relates to something that's really hard to get across, but here's my sense of it. Um, there are two kinds of people, those who do and those who don't realize that we're all the same. I'm both. So I've had to deal with this question. Um, it's one of the places where my curiosity resides, which is we all lie. We're all delusional. We lie to ourselves most of all. So what makes someone a liar? Really interesting question. We all engage in hypocrisy. We all cut corners. We all gaslight. That is, in a debate between you and me, I'm going to try to get you to pay attention to what I think is relevant, not what you think is relevant. In an argument, I'm going to do that. So, what makes someone a gaslighter? What makes someone a delusional person? One of the places I've gotten to borrows from the original quote, which was power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So tends to is really important to me, and it's amazing to me how much that's overlooked, even by people who make a uh, a concentration of it. Absolute power corrupts. That's when it goes absolute. So when I think of an asshole, I'm thinking of an absolutist. And I'm with you, Chris, because actually, I don't think God was created in man's image. I think he was created in an asshole's image. I think he was created in what Trump has perfected. That he's always right, he's always righteous, he's always powerful, and he's got perfect integrity. So, yeah, and I see the difference you're pointing to when you talk about delusional people, but I would have to say absolutely delusional people because I'm delusional too. I haven't met anybody yet who isn't. And especially those people who insist that they're not delusional people. That's a red flag. So even if I talk about with disdain about delusional people, I'm doing that self-flattering, self-reporting. That is, I consider myself not to be. I mean, when I talk to Trump trolls, they will accuse me of bias. Notice how this works. So they have disdain for bias. I call this defaulty logic or exempt by contempt. They have contempt for my bias. So to them, that feels like it proves they don't have bias. So when a right winger says that all of the news is biased towards the left, and the same would be true on the left, what they mean is it's all biased away from whatever they think their fucking gold standard is. And so I'm watching for that. And I encourage you to watch for it too, if only in your practical life. Forget about the politics, forget about the religion. If you're dating someone who does that stuff, that needs some stress testing before you go to bed together or before you marry anyway. You go to bed whenever you want. Um, but, but, but damn, and there's a lot of it on the dating scene. A whole lot of self-reported flattery. And why? Same damn reason. Why did I date so intensely for so many years? I've been retired from it for 10 years, and I want to say it's been quite the relief for a guy like me. Because you can imagine how insufferable I would be as a partner. It's exhausting. Women think, oh, wow, he's a guy who can name more than two emotions. And I have to tell him, no, you'd find me oppressive in no time. But what was I out there for? I was there for that affirmation. It was romance. It was the dream of happily ever after. I came to a point where I realized it's not even safe for me to play it out there. That's a form of circle jerking I don't want to do anymore. Um, I, I'm better off doing it by playing music and thinking I'm a god, a rock star, or watching movies or jerking off. It's simply a safer place for me to play it out. I'm trying to manage while exercising that appetite. Okay. Um, okay. Miss Anonymous, I want to point to something that relates to what we all been talking about. He is selling them hate. Let me just pick up on that. Love is the answer is a very popular notion across the spectrum. What do we mean by that? Well, we resist, or you could even say we hate hate. But what is hate? If I love something, I'd hate its opposite. If I love equality, I'm going to hate inequality. And I don't want to mince words about it. Um, People do mince words about it. Hate is basically what a lot of that kind of one-sided approach takes. From my perspective, all preferences are relative. If I prefer one thing, I don't prefer something else with respect to it. And you take that to the extreme and you end up with every love being paired with a hate. If I love my kids, I would hate something happened to them. I would hate the person who did something to them. And I don't want to mince words about it because I think what we're doing there is very romantic. I also love ice cream. And so one thing I can do on the cheap is to say, I want everyone in the world to have ice cream. Let everybody have all the ice cream they want. I think that stunts growth on the question. For me, the question is what to love and what to hate. And if I'm stuck thinking, well, I'm a love person, not a hate person, um, and I point to their hate and cruelty because they hate different things than I hate, I'm sidestepping the fundamental question, what to love and what to hate. And I gotta tell you, if you look at the Trump memes, there are memes. They think they're full of love. I think they're hella wrong because of the cruelty, the sadonarcissism of it. But I don't assume they're the only ones capable of that. And I see the sadonarcissism in us talking about them like they are just pure evil. And I do talk about them as just pure evil. It comes back to this question again. I'm of two minds about it. We are all one, and yet there seems to be a difference. There are assholes. And in my book, I spend 250 pages just trying to get clear on what's going on with them. The book's called What's Up with Assholes. But the subtitle is How to Spot and Stop Them Without Becoming One. And the whole point is I spend much more time on what they are. Why? Because I really want to understand what an asshole is. And the question that inspired all that work I do in psychoproctology is what is a butthead? Since it can't just be whoever I happen to butt heads with. So I'm trying to get beyond the gut felt disdain I have for these guys to understand what makes them tick like time bombs and what to do about it. Okay, so let me see. I'm trying to catch up here. Um, uh, um, let's see. I'm going to pick up on Snowy Owl, and then I'm going to come to the other ones here. Thank you guys for being here, by the way. It's just a delight to be with you. And I should tell you, I'm going to remind you, station identification. If you want a conversation where we actually talk and where lots of people talk, uh, um, email me. I'm going to send you my email address. You should have it anyway, but it's just my initials at my name. Here, email me and join this group. 100 have signed up for it. About 20 show up, and we have a real good conversation. And that's where we can get beyond this thing where I'm blathering away and you guys are stuck typing. I'm trying to get to that place because I don't want that power. Okay, so I want to pick up on this thing. Biological baggage, sex drive. Snowy Owl, my argument would be that we've got a convergence. This often happens. So imagine what happens to sex drive, all of this hormonal certainty that just saturated me in my youth. My friends would say, Jeremy, you just drip sexuality. And I don't mean that they meant that I was attractive. It's that they meant that I just was incredibly horny. Um, uh, and I'm not anymore. I'm at most enthusiastic because of poor nostalgia for when I had all of that drive. But it is not just that drive. It's that drive in the realm of language, where language makes us really anxious species, really craving reassurance, really craving what I call endorphment, the endorphin rush of being endorsed. And boy, did it play big for me. And it was my equivalent of religion. I've been an atheist for most of my life, but it was what Ernest Becker would call my immortality project. It was how I was going to live forever. And the reason I know that is because when I was falling in love, it felt like I was being granted happily ever after hereafter. And when we broke up, usually because a woman found me ultimately oppressively insufferable with how mouthy I am, it felt like death. And I could say, oh, I see, that's where I'm playing it out. Okay. Um, okay, so it's a convergence, and it's quite the clusterfuck. Fucking is quite the clusterfuck. That is, I once wrote an article, "What Sex Really Means," and um, and it's just a list of, I think it was something like 26. It was A to Z, multiple choice. It's all over the map. And yet, so it's got that in common with sacred text. The relationship between sexual drive and religious drive is fascinating, from gospel music to R&B, monotheism and monogamy, um, uh, sex and prayer. There are some really interesting parallels there. Um, and 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 the sexual act as a sacred text, it's supposed to mean one thing. It can mean anything. To me, when I look at the sacred texts, they're sold as if they mean one thing. They read like a catalog of rationalizations for anything. Okay, so I think Trump's dad romanticized Donald like he made Donald into what he wanted. Bleh, it's so tough. Poor kid. Okay, I like that because of the ambiguity. Um, uh, there is an idea out there that that all narcissists have a chip on their shoulder from childhood, that they were traumatized in their childhoods. I don't buy it at all. Uh, we all would want any reassurance we can get. If you want to predict people's behavior, look at where they're gaining their confidence. And whether you were deprived of reassurance in your childhood or spoiled by it, you can end up an asshole. Either way. So when people say to me, I can't be an egotist, I hate myself too much, um, I don't buy it. I think that the hate is one of the reasons why you would end up idealizing yourself. That is, you've got to compensate for that hatred somehow so you can be really splayed. And that's kind of my point. When I was at my most anxious, I didn't dream of being okay. I dreamt of becoming enlightened. So to me, that's built right in there. So yeah, poor kid, poor spoiled kid. But I don't think of him as poor. I have no sympathy for him. Um, I have sympathy for some of his followers. I don't have any sympathy for him. Okay. Uh, yeah. So we're seeing in Che's two comments his or her ambivalence on this topic. Um, he's a mean adult and a poor kid. This comes back to what I talked about at the beginning when perhaps there weren't as many people here, so I'll just mention it again. Sympathy for the devil. What do you do about innocent evil? Um, one way I keep that conundrum alive in me is to remember, if I were them, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing. Is what part of me am I supposedly bringing over into them if when I say if I were them? Um, to recognize that this is, it's not just there, but for the grace of God go I. It's also kind of there go I. I'm like that. Okay, maybe we could zoom. Yes, sorry. So, Che, the thing that I've got on that, if you email me, it's a Zoom conversation. Most of the folks are in the States. There's a couple in Europe who are dealing with the fascists over there, or the authoritarians, whatever you want to call them. Um, uh, and that's a conversation. So I really invite any of you to join that. Oh, and also if anybody wants a one-on-one, I don't sell it much, but I'm available. If you find yourself dealing with a local asshole, please get in touch. It's my specialty. I have some techniques that are not sold by the personal coaches and not sold by the psychotherapists, and that's a whole gig I do. Most of my clients these days, for whatever reason, I didn't advertise to them, are people, men and women, in troubled marriages where the checks and balances are way out of balance, where there's a power imbalance that they had to deal with. They kept the peace for a long time, but it's gotten to be a real. It's gotten to be too much, and these people want their minds back. So to me, again, lifestyle brand doesn't matter. Why you claim this godlike authority, whether it be religious, spiritual, political, philosophical, or just your only cause is cause I said so, doesn't matter to me. This appetite to play God is huge in humans, and we got to get better at dealing with this. Yeah, so Mary Trump, his niece, speaks out a lot about his family life and the dynamics of it. Yes, I've read both her books. I love them. And I also thought there was a way in which she might um, still be under the influence of this psychological notion that the only reason a human would become an asshole is because they've been traumatized in their youth. I don't buy it. I believe they're all wimps in a way that I believe that I'm a wimp because of grocery stores. This relates to something um, uh, fundamental. My research colleague is writing a whole book about it called Falling Up. How do we ever end up in codependent relationships? Um, in general, in biology, the way we think about the codependency of multicellularity, where all my bodies are dependent on each other, in terms of the advantages, the evolutionary advantage. My question is, the real question is how? Because when you become dependent on something else, you give up some autonomy, and organisms don't tend to do that lightly. And the way it happens is through addiction. So try this out. My ancestors a few generations back could farm. Okay. Along comes this other way to get food, grocery stores. I've lost the ability to farm. And as a result, I'm dependent upon them. So a Trumpist has lost the ability to to keep their own mojo up. They have become addicted to a source of mojo. And as a result, they don't need to maintain as much mojo because they're actually dependent upon it. Now, they would say they love it, and I would say that they're addicted to it. And I don't see a difference between love and addiction other than your prediction about whether it's going to end up what good or not. So for me, the codependency, so I don't think of codependency as a bad thing. I think of it as a phenomena that is either good or bad. Just like I think of love as something that's either good or bad. I hate the love that Trumpists have for each other. Their codependency is awful for the world. I also see that they are wimps for having landed on their fake authority. They're Trump cards in both senses. Trump meaning fake. It originally meant fake, and it also meant beats all. So it's a trumped up Trump card. It's what I call a wild card Trump card. That is, they can do anything, and whatever they do is always the best. So I see them as wusses now. Trump is a total weenie. Can you imagine how he would have to deal in real life? He's totally addicted to his fake authority. But whether he got that way through pampering, helicopter parents who saw him as a god from birth, or whether he got there because he was destitute of love and couldn't get any, that's a separate question. That's what we'd call an etiological question in psychology, how you got there. So I would have an interesting conversation with Mary Trump about this, because whether she kind of gets it both ways, but I've heard from what I remember of her book a little bit, or at least some people's interpretation of it. I got a friend who is a psychologist working with psychopaths in prisons, and she buys completely into the traumatized childhood story. I think that's half the story. Whether you're pleasured or pained in your youth, one way or another, or just a normal person or someone who's education deprived, you would want this fake authority. That's what you'd want. That's what anybody would want. That's what any organism would want if they could put words to it. To make sure I understand proof, are you saying that there are no people who are genuinely humble? No, I'm not saying that. Let me see. I think of humility as a move, and also as an attitude. Um, I'm unclear about this. So I want to think about it some more. I don't. I didn't mean to say that, but that may fall out of what I'm saying. Yeah, I think it falls out of what I'm saying actually, is that we can talk about you've probably heard me say it. The way I distinguish between decent people and non-decent people or assholes is that decent people recognize that confirmation bias is their problem to manage, and assholes treat it as a solution to all their problems. So, Linda, we're on to a topic that I'm so delighted you brought up in the Sunday meeting. I mean, I'm really glad that's on the table here. But I'm saying that the humans that I don't think there's anyone who's purely humble, like absolutely humble. I see a difference. I see thousands and jillions of ways to be a decent person. And I think that we all have this mojo issue we have to handle. And that it's our birthright or birth wrong, however you want to talk about it. It's a thing that we're born with because we're humans, because uh, we we are an incredibly anxious species. Um, and Linda, this would be relevant to your own interests, the difference between humans and dogs. Um, dogs live, or any animal is subject to more roughing it than we are, but their worlds are quite limited by their lack of language. And we humans are trudging through a sandstorm of mojo eroding possibilities that we can conceive of and no other organism can. Um, as a result of that, we are humbled or humiliated a lot in the dead of night, humbled by the possibility, by the simple fragileness of us. We're the only creature that can foresee in detail the inevitability of our own deaths. So I want to give us that. It's our birthright or birth wrong. And the question becomes, how do you manage it? So it's not about the lifestyle brands. Like I say, I mean, one way I think about it is that in a free adaptive society, you don't get to tell people how they have to live, how they should live. But you still got to put a leash on the assholes, or else it won't remain a free adaptive society. So for me, the real question is, are you watching someone who's got enough curiosity that they can tolerate a little doubt? Or are you dealing with someone who is an absolutist? And absolute, the term absolute relates totally to this. The term means dissolved away from. That is, nothing can influence it. It's literally incorrigible. Nothing can correct its path. It's unchecked power. Um, yes, so all organisms, yeah, you're on Miss Anonymous, you're onto it. That's right. That's right. Codependency between organisms, that's, you can say that that's how sexual reproduction happens. Horizontal gene transfer in bacteria. There are a few abiotic species, and it would have had that start that way. That is, you couldn't start with um, uh, our theory is that life starts with non-parasitic viruses that don't have DNA. Why are they non-parasitic? There's no one to parasite on. But codependency is there from the beginning. And once again, is it love or is it addiction? Is it co-love, mutual love, or is it addiction? That's the question. I'm not trying to avoid dependencies. I'm trying to get the right dependencies, the ones that are good for me and good for society. And that itself is a trade-off. It's built right into the challenge of partnership, which I see as 6 partnerships. A partnership is I love you, I love me, I love us, you love you love me, you love us. That's 6 things to juggle. And the checks and balances are what sustain them. Um, okay. Does that really matter? Like the ideology? Um, uh, I'm jumping now to Che's question. Uh, does the etiology matter? Well, to me, yes and no. So I don't care whether an asshole became an asshole because he was suffering, or because I care, but it's not the fundamental challenge for me. It's a strategic challenge for me. in dealing with how someone became an asshole. And I want to say one more thing about it. But the etiology, this broader etiology, where I'm actually going from origins of life issues to assholes, which is the double entendre of my channel's name. That is, we are all beings that are trying. I have to explain that from chemistry. But there's also assholes, trying beings, people who really try our patience. And so, yeah, for me, etiology matters a lot. How we ended up being the kind of people we are. That's my antidote to this merely descriptive issue I'm dealing with. So check this out. Here's the bind I'm in when I'm trying to figure out how to respond to someone who comes on all gangbusters, like they're going to tutor me on the world. Okay, uh, think about it like a pyramid scheme. How much of an asshole, and how much are they engaged in innocent evil? How much are they a cult leader? How much are the cult follower? I really got to know that if I'm going to be dealing strategically with them, and I really can't know it. I can only guess at it. I can guess whether I'm dealing with a follower. I mean, I don't want to come on hard to a follower, someone who's innocent and just following his local culture. Like I said, if I were him, I'd be doing what he's doing. I'm going to try to reach through to them. Um, and and then at the same time, I don't want to be gentle with a cult leader. And it's like a pyramid scheme. I mean, I think of it kind of as a spectrum. How much of are you a leader? It depends on how high up you are this pyramid scheme. However you got there doesn't matter to me as much. That is, whether you had a bad childhood, or you were a chump in school and are trying to compensate for it the way Peter Thiel does. Uh, it's interesting, but I'm trying to be strategic with people who have figured out a way to uh, to evacuate all curiosity. And that's the core challenge. And for me, the etiology of why humans ended up like this, being an asshole is a human thing. There are almost every organism is a parasite, uh, or a predator in some way or another. That is, organisms live off of other organisms, the way that we eat vegetables and meat and all that sort of stuff. But asshole is a human thing. It comes with language. And I'm trying to get really clear about what it is, because it's a sprawl. If you attack a Trumpist from wherever your gut tells you to, they're going to deflect you. I got to get to what the real problem is. And it is this evacuation. I actually mean it like shitting your pants in terror. One way or another, we would like that kind of evacuation. And then once we've gotten addicted to it, we'll depend on it, this fake authority. And that's what makes them all weenies. Okay, wow. I would love to see the conversation. Yeah, we didn't. Okay, so here's the interesting thing, Miss Anonymous, that if you're referring to the conversation we had about innocent evil, it came up anonymously. I try to keep it anonymous in the meeting. It came up. Sorry. Um, uh, it came up as one person saying, I know Trumpists. These are decent people in their everyday dealings. That is, they are only absolutist about this one thing, or mostly about this one thing. And another person saying, I'm sorry, I got no sympathy for these guys. They're doing pure evil. And that's a good question to be dealing with. One way it comes up is, are they dumb or dumb like a fox? You know, uh, is it a clever thing? Do they mean to do this thing? Uh, do they believe their lies? All of that stuff comes up, and in a way, I set that aside. If they are acting like they have solved the world and the only job left is to tutor all the rest of us, um, and they've just exited Plato's cave and are heroically rescuing us from the liberal gaslighting or something like that, or the religious gaslighting if you're an atheist, or the atheist gaslighting if you're religious, whatever. I don't care about lifestyle brand. I mean, I'm paying attention to policy for what saves the world, but in the psychological work, I don't get distracted by that. I'm talking about this appetite. If they come on like that, they're basically incurious. Okay, let's see. Some people are ignorant, therefore innocent on some level. Some people are not. They know they're evil. That's right. Okay, yes, we're onto this. But again, Che, I want to bring you back to this thing. I personally, whatever you do, I don't get to say that some people are ignorant. I'm ignorant. Everybody's ignorant about something. Uh, we're all trying to figure out what to ignore, and we're doing it mostly gut by gut. So this comes back to the question about whether we're genuinely humble. Um, uh, we're doing it by the way I put it in this last video was we're stuck as humans with our highest priority still being comfort in our own skin. We prefer pleasure to pain. That's a really convincing thing for all of us. And if you know pain, and you probably do, you know how convincing that shit is. It's really convincing. In the meantime, we've got language, and as a result, we are floating in a turbulent maelstrom of ideas, some of which bring us pleasure, others bring us pain. What are we most likely to want to ignore? The ideas that bring us pain. And you bring that out to the extreme, and all you've got is this I came out of the cave, I've taken the red pill. From now on, no idea can plague me anymore. I don't have any more anxiety. I've purged myself of that. I feel like such a hero, which proves I am in the world. It's awful. It's human. It's what goes on with us. So when I said earlier that I speed read hate mail, that's my ignorance playing out. And then on top of that, what am I doing with my life? I'm paying attention to some things and ignoring others. And I am making mistakes. That is, I will think that something is significant that over time turns out to be insignificant. And I'll think that something was insignificant, or I just won't notice it at all. And it'll turn out to be significant. That's what makes humans so anxious. We've got all this capacity for what we call counterfactuals. I could say if only or what if that a dog doesn't have. The dog might have some variation on it, some primitive version of it, but with language, we really go to town on that stuff. So if only I had paid attention to this, not that, or if only I had ignored this, not that. That's part of the human condition. So what I'm saying is when I see someone say, well, some people are ignorant, or some people are delusional, or some people are assholes, I'm sort of with it and I'm sort of against it, because I have to be careful not to just do what I call defaulty logic or exempt by contempt. I just want to come back to those terms for a second. Defaulty logic is, since they're wrong, it proves I'm right by default. And exempt by contempt is, the more contempt I have for haters, the more it proves I'm loving. I don't want to go there. When I taught psychology, on the first day of class, I would teach the most popular psychological theory in the world, and I'd call it dipshit theory. I also called it barroom dipshit theory. And I'd have every student in the class name a mystery to them, a psychological mystery. Why the hell would people like Nickelback was the only one I remember, but we'd go all around the room and say, why the hell would... And I'd say, here's the answer you get from dipshit theory, that they're dipshits. Yeah, that's the explanation. So there are dipshits in this world, and then there's this other species of wonderful people like me. And I don't have to explain what they are, because I've simply given them a name. And you probably know from my work, I'm not that interested in the various names, especially the clinical names for assholes or for absolutists. That is, the nuanced differences that become kind of clinical sounding names that make you sound neutral when you say it. When you say, well, he's a narcissist, he's a gaslighter, he's got antisocial personality disorder, he's a psychopath, he's a sociopath. I'm interested in those differences, but they're not the main thing. I'm not trying to do a taxonomy of assholes. A lot of people who write about assholes, and there's not a lot of them around, but they tend to do taxonomies of different kinds. So there's what is it these days? There's the explicit and the implicit narcissist or something like that. Um, I get it. And if you're in the auto mechanics like troubleshooting of clinical psychology, I get it. You want to do that stuff. It's how you deal with the protocols and the rubrics and the DSM and all of that. I'm interested in the core appetites that would drive a temptation in this direction for anyone, whether it's congenital or not. Here's an example. I do not think of narcissists as having no conscience. They're not psychopaths that way. A psychopath is a rare disorder, you could say, where there's actually a blindness. There's no basal skin response, no reactivity to horror. Um, no, narcissists have a master excuse. No deed too dirty for an X like me. X standing for whatever, for someone mindful, for someone MAGA, for someone Christian, for someone spiritual. Um, they have a conscience. It's just perfectly assuaged. That is, it never nags them. It always reassures them. So those subtle differences are important to me, but I don't want to get into the taxonomy because of the way that it gets abused. When suffering pain is taught as love, okay, I want to make sense of that. I think one way to think about it, uh, good, Brian, yeah, I get that. But suffering pain is taught as love. Notice how this works. When someone says it hurts me more than it hurts you, um, or what I'm giving you is tough love, uh, um, uh, I get it. I've dealt with a fair number of circumstances where I had to give someone tough love. Um, but at the same time, I don't buy it. And this becomes this interesting challenge. If someone says, you're abusing me, and the other person says, no, I'm giving you tough love, um, they both are entitled to that opinion about what's going on, and neither of them get to declare it outright, like they are right about it. It's very complicated. And another reason why we want God. We would want some moral authority, the Supreme Court, to decide in our favor. Um, but so what you could say is this human desire for affirmation and comfort around skin can play out in someone who says, when I punish you, it's God's love. When you punish me, it's the devil. One way I think about this, and I think I'll close on this, I don't want to wear out my welcome, and I'm a lot, um, uh, is what I call hard left, hard right, hard center, hard choices. And I think of this as a kind of maturing one can go through or not. So it starts with hard left. Love is the answer. And then you go out in the world and you try that and you find out, oh, it's not the answer. So there are actually a lot of Trumpists who have become hate mongers because they got burnt on the love is the answer, baby boomer, hippie, counterculture, love is the answer. There's a lot of them who laugh at us, and rightly so. I was one of those hippie counterculture guys in spades. I was totally like that. I mean, I joined the world's largest hippie commune and I became an elected elder there at 24. I was totally into the love is the answer thing. And now I'm looking back and thinking, shit, damn, I was just a candy ass kid who thought you could live in a world like that. Actually, no, it's a much more dangerous world than that. We need our defenses. And so when you think back to one of those right wing Archie Bunker types, they had a truth I was missing back then. They had half the truth, which is you got to be tough sometimes. So anyway, love is the answer. Ouch, that didn't work. Toughness is the answer. That's hard right. So you go from hard left to hard right. And then you go to hard center, which is tough love is the answer. And then you realize that tough love isn't the answer. It's the question. That's hard choices. Hard left, hard right, hard center, hard choices. Hard choices are when to be tough and when to be loving. where to be on that spectrum I described earlier as the range I apparently have. Maybe because I've cultivated, maybe my temperament, I don't know. But I can be really nice or I can be a real hard ass. And a lot of the hard ass end of the spectrum is simply my safety. Most people don't get to live a life where they can get away with saying the mouthy shit I say. They lose their job. They don't have food on their table if they do that stuff. But one way or another, I'm dealing with that spectrum. So if you think tough love is the answer, the hard center, you get to this place. The way I frame it is the Jews going to Hitler and saying, you see what I did to there? Tripler. Jews going to Hitler and saying, look, you want to kill 6 million of us. We want you to kill 0 of us. So 3 million? No, you got to be all over the spectrum, and you've got to try to figure out where to be on the spectrum. And that is not a fun place for people to be. When you work out at the gym, the machines are easier because you don't have to maintain the balance. You just have to push up. If you're working with free weights, you've got to maintain the balance too. That's the issue for morality too. People want to lean over all the way over. They want to say, I'm the tough one. I'm anti-PC, or I'm the loving one. No, we got to get better at dealing across that spectrum. Okay, so let's see what we got. I'm going to just pick up on some last things. Calmly and relentlessly, as closely and close to truth, meet lies with truth. I can't go there. Sorry, I understand, but to me, that's another idealization, and I have to make an important distinction from the public policy school I went to. Its slogan was "Speak truth to power." I can't go there. And also, seeing the Trumpists, what they say is he speaks truth. No, there's a huge difference between honesty and truth. Obviously, I don't get to claim the truth. That's me pretending the universe agrees with me. I don't get to do that. I can be honest. I can pursue the truth. I can debate the truth, but I cannot pretend that what I'm saying is truth, or else what am I doing? I'm jerking off. And I want to jerk off. I just don't want to do it in public. I want to jerk off watching movies or porn or something like that. I don't want to go out in the world and pretend that I'm some hero who claims the truth. And why? Because I don't want to be like the Trumpists. It's dangerous. Don't jerk off in public. So I encourage you to think about that, and also think about the ways in which that is a demoralizing suggestion from me. And I mean that in 2 senses. It's spiritive, it's demoralizing in that it reduces one's confidence, but it's also stripping the moralizing off of our claims. So if I can describe something as David did here, and I've described this kind of stuff plenty. I'm not different from you, David, in this respect. To say in pat instructions, the protocol for dealing, meet lies with truth. It's a claim of having moral authority, that I am with the universe. Now, I am trying to figure out what's true. I just don't get to claim that my honest interpretation, however carefully developed, is truth. I'm a devout fallibilist. My argument is, no matter how confident, arrogant, severe I get, no matter how confident I am in a bet, I have to remain still more confident that it is a bet, that I don't have truth. Because those people who claim to have truth, and that everybody who disagrees with them is liars, I get too much of that from the Trumpists. I don't want to copy it, and I can't beat them at that game anyway. That's the other thing, is that I don't actually, I very rarely bring up facts with them. And this is actually a liberation for anybody who wants to fight them, but isn't all boned up on public policy. I don't think that's the issue with them. I think the issue is they're pretending that their honesty is truth, and anybody who disagrees with his lies. That's their biggest problem. That's their incuriosity. Okay. Where if they can't have. Okay, so I want to say that in response to Mr. Taken Time, thank you, I like your handle. Uh, we live in a win-win and a win-lose society. There's obviously both going on, and I would say that the Trumpists overall are a win-win for them at the expense of everybody else. So in that sense, it's zero sum. I don't think it's a society thing. I think it goes back to the origins of life. People sometimes tell me that the problem is capitalism, and I have to make this distinction. All organisms have the nature of life is competition and cooperation for limited real world resources that organisms depend on. That's capitalism by one definition. The other definition deals with abstractions and technologies, um, and the ability to store capital, um, more than fat on your body or nuts in a tree, like a lot of it, and the potential for infinite status or infinite money, that's the runaway effect. But if we're talking about zero sum, there's an aspect of zero sum and non-zero sum in all of life from my perspective. Okay, let's see what else goes. And let go of trying to change minds. Uh, yeah, you could say, David, um, yeah, there's no one size fits all answer. I'm just picking up on the thing right above it. And yet, in a way, we're stuck with this challenge of how are we going to make room for enough of us that we don't just admit. It's not. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm going to have to think about that one, Miss Olympus. There is no one size fits all answer. It seems like that's certainly true. And one way to think about that is where we stand depends on where we sit. And so that's one of the reasons why I think most of us are decent folk, who've got a degree of humility, but also have their axe to grind. Everybody's got it. And the question is this super sharp axe, the self-idealization, and what to do about that axe to grind, because like I say, we still have to put a leash on assholery, or else it won't remain a free, adaptive, diverse society. And adaptation depends on diversity. Uh, I let go of trying to change minds in terms of trying to change their mind to my truth. But I am trying to figure out how to, it's not open minds. I'd make a distinction between an open mind and a curious mind. I have a curious mind. I am not open-minded. There's a bunch of stuff you could ask me about, and there's really decimal dust chance that I'm going to change my mind about it in my life. There's a chance, but it's low likelihood. So I wouldn't want to grandstand about how I'm open-minded and other people who disagree with me are closed-minded, which I get. That's a huge percentage of what I get from liberals and radicals and Trumpists, everybody. You must be closed-minded because you're not open to the idea that I'm closed-minded about. It's very standard. I am trying to bring out some curiosity, though, and I think I have a better bet of that if I'm not trying to sell them on my truths. I'm trying to get them curious, and I'm trying to punk them for not being curious. What weenies they are for not being curious, that they can't tolerate doubt, anxiety, that they're basically pussies. Um, and I'm wrestling these days with these female versions of those kind of terms. We talk about dicks, but yesterday I coined a term that involved the C word, and then I had to retract it. I just realized I can't go there yet. Um, uh, okay. Let's see. Thanks for fixing it. Calm relentlessness. That's right. Okay, so the calm relentlessness that David's talking about, I want what I call confidence and competence. This is true whether I'm playing a jazz gig or whether I'm dealing with a Trump troll. That is, and how I get that is through curiosity, not fake heroism. I'm not speaking truth to power. I'm a guy who's trying to figure out how to play better in jazz bands, how to eke out curiosity from Trumpists more effectively. And that's where the calm comes from. So it used to be that when I would go head to head with a Trumpist, I'd end up needing a shower afterwards. I don't need that anymore. And now that I realize, no, I'm woodshedding. I'm trying to figure out what works. So in that kind of trial and error experimentation, um, And not because I need the answer. I don't care where the answer comes from. I just think we really need, I mean, I dedicated my asshole book to future psychoproctologists who will do a better job than I have on this big question. How do you humbly humble humans who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? Um, so I guess my competence and confidence, both of those with calm in them, come from a kind of curiosity that I'm identifying. I think I'm I'm identifying as learning more than learned. Um, if I'm learned, then I'm playing hero. You know. Let's see. Yeah, fascism is ubiquitous and exhausting, and runs a deeper. It runs as a undercurrent in humans. The appetite for that kind of, when you think about the origins of the word fascism, it's the same. It's a convergence of the same word that means fag, homosexual. It's a bundle of sticks. And so what it is, the safety in the confirmation. Think about the nested conversation, uh, um, confirmation you get. So you get the peers who all agree with you. You get the sadomasochistic thrill of punking everybody who disagrees with you. And you're all doing it in the name of a demagogue like Trump or your Peter or your guru or whatever. And he's doing it because he's had a revelation and knows that God is on his side. So, man, is that cozy for weenies? That would be what a comfort zone. I mean, it's bubble rapture. It's the rapture of being in a bubble like that. Okay, let's see what we got. All right. I'm going to try and cut this up. How'd that come work for Jewish Beck? Um, yes, MK's Nip. I just rewatched the movie Defiance, in part because I wanted to deal with this question of innocent evil. They're struggling in this. This is a Daniel Craig movie in which he plays a Jew who ended up rescuing a bunch of Jews by taking them out into the forest. He's dealing with that same question: innocent evil, sympathy for the devil. Um, and let's see what else we've got here. I'm going to end soon because I don't want to keep you too long. It's a dance with empathy. That's interesting. Um, yeah, just this one last thing about a scapegoat. Uh, that a scapegoat said. Dancing with apathy, empathy, and the other part is the sympathy thing. So for me, the way I deal with it is I want to be able to imagine, I want to be able to put myself in anyone's shoes, anyone's shoes. I want to remember when they were my shoes, and I don't want it automatically to lead to sympathy and charity. If it's got to lead to sympathy and charity, whether suddenly I got the golden rule eating at me, and I got to accommodate everybody, no, that's not going to work. So I have to have a clutch pedal between empathy and sympathy. Okay. Um, all right. Let's see. Okay. So I'm gonna call it now. Remember these things. You can email me if you want to join that group that meets every other Sunday at 9 in the morning. For now, I'll sign you right up. Get in touch with you if you're dealing with something in your personal life and you want some practical, tailored suggestions that you might not hear anywhere, because my angle at this stuff is different from what you get from personal coaches and psychotherapists. It covers that range. We talk psychology plenty in my one-on-one sessions or even couple sessions. But and then on top of that, I'm around. You can email me. My days are mostly free. I'm mostly at home. If you got a question that's come up for you, run it by me. Lots of folks do. That's for free. Just email me and I'll point you to something or whatever. And it can be across this entire spectrum. Cradle to grave, origins of life to our grave situation. Thank you for being here, you guys. Thank you. And I am now doing this once a week. And thank you for joining. And in the meantime, in between, come up with ways to kick the tires on the ship. Okay, nothing I say is immune to that. Like I said, however confident I am in a bet, I remain still more confident that it is a bet. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you, guys.